It was New Year's Eve, and the Countdown 2016 celebration was underway at the National Orange Show grounds. Tens of thousands of people were gathered to bring in the new year of 2017. Detective Sherry Vasilis and Detective Tony King were in uniform and working the event. As the night went on, multiple partygoers had approached them to shake hands and thank them for being there. While this was taking place, the subject approached Detective King with his outstretched hand. As Detective King reached out to shake hands with the individual, he lunged forward and grabbed on with both hands to Detective King's holstered weapon. A violent struggle then ensued. It was later learned that the suspect was found to be extremely under the influence of a controlled substance. As the fight went on, Detective Vasilis joined in, and the suspect continued to wrestle away Detective King's firearm. During the struggle, the suspect was tased and struck repeatedly. However, he appeared to be impervious to pain due to his severe level of intoxication. With the struggle going on for well over 2 minutes, the detectives realized that a citizen had come to their aid. The suspect fought this citizen as well, but he too was up to the challenge. The three of them were ultimately able to subdue the suspect, and he was taken into custody. The suspect would later have no recollection of what he had just done due to his severe level of intoxication. The Good Samaritan who had come forward and put himself in harm's way to assist our officers turned out to be no ordinary citizen. He was in fact a member of the United States Navy who has proudly served his country for the past 9 years. On this night, he served yet again. For having demonstrated himself by an act of heroism and placing himself in great risk of personal safety to assist our officers, the San Bernardino Police Department proudly presents Navy Corpsman Rendy Tolo with the Police Citizens Medal. Detective Kimberly Hernandez serves as the San Bernardino Police Department's sole full-time vice investigator. In this capacity, she has evolved into a respected expert in her field with both investigators and district attorneys from throughout Southern California who seek her advice and input. During this past year, Detective Hernandez has arrested over 28 suspects for human trafficking. 13 of those suspects have already been convicted and are now serving significant prison sentences. Detective Hernandez's passion for what she does has drawn regional attention to the devastating impact of human trafficking, as well as its connection to violent crime. Largely due to her efforts and education of the community and law enforcement professionals as well, a county-wide human trafficking task force is being created, which will bring local, state, and federal authorities together to target human trafficking. Her commitment to this cause has improved and possibly saved the lives of many young women in our community, as well as having improved the quality of life for our citizens living within the impacted areas. For Detective Hernandez's efforts in providing a valuable service to the department in duty of great responsibility and importance to law enforcement, the San Bernardino Police Department is honored to present her with the Meritorious Service Medal. At the onset of Jerry Beal's promotion to sergeant in January of 2013, he expressed a desire to be involved with the Field Training Officer program. With the department trying to recover from a nearly 30% loss in its sworn ranks, he knew there was going to be a continuous influx of new officers coming in. He saw this as an opportunity to help shape the future of the organization. Sergeant Beal took on the auxiliary duty of supervising the Field Training Officer program, and from day one, he hit the ground running. Over the next 4 years, he would oversee the training of over 50 new officers, and he helped to reconstruct the FTO program itself. He was instrumental in the revamping of the training program and helped to introduce new training protocols which vastly improved the program as a whole. He regularly held meetings with the FTOs to create a team teaching environment, and he routinely put out training updates and directives to help maintain consistency, quality, and professionalism in the program. It was not uncommon for him to dedicate as much as 15 hours per week to this additional responsibility, with much of that being on his own time. In January of this year, Sergeant Beal was appointed to a new role within the department, but the program he worked tirelessly toward will carry on, and the department is better off for his efforts. For having provided a valuable service to the department in a duty of great responsibility and of critical importance to law enforcement, the San Bernardino Police Department is honored to present Sergeant Jerry Beal with the Meritorious Service Medal.
David 17, David 2, Star 4, 5150, suicidal. 664 North Crescent. It's going to be our SIN number 4991.
It was just after 7 o'clock p.m. on November 14th, 2016, when officers Mike Taylor and Marcus Pasquera were dispatched on a report of a possible suicide inside a residence in the 600 block of North Crescent Street.
911 emergency.
Hi, someone hung themselves in my neighbor's garage. Yeah.
Okay, and he hung himself?
Yeah.
Is he still hanging, or did they cut him down?
He's still hanging.
Okay, is he breathing or anything
He's
like that?
by a wire.
I'm sorry?
It doesn't look like he's breathing. He's hanging by a wire.
The officers arrived at the location almost simultaneously, and they rushed inside to find the male victim hanging in his garage with an electrical cord wrapped around his neck. With Officer Taylor lifting the subject up to relieve the pressure, Officer Pasquera used his pocket knife to cut the cord. The officers then immediately began performing CPR and continued doing so until medical aid arrived on scene. The subject was hospitalized for a month following the suicide attempt, but ultimately recovered from his near-death experience. For having distinguished themselves in saving the life of another in the performance of their duties, the San Bernardino Police Department proudly presents Officer Michael Taylor and Officer Marcus Pasquera with the Life-Saving Medal. Throughout 2015 and into 2016, the city of San Bernardino and several surrounding communities experienced a significant increase in violence-related crimes. Much of this activity was directly attributed to the California Garden Street Gang. On June 13, 2016, Operation No Boundaries was created. This task force comprised investigators of the San Bernardino Police Department as well as investigators of the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department. With much of the intelligence gathering having been conducted by Detective Edward Flores and Detective Nicholas Oldendorf, electronic surveillance as well as physical surveillance began on the gang. Over the course of the next 4 months, hundreds of hours of investigation was conducted and multiple enforcement actions were taken against members of the gang. At the culmination of the investigation, 41 suspects were taken into custody. 5 homicides which had occurred in the city and an additional homicide which had taken place in the county's jurisdiction were solved. An additional 5 homicides were prevented during the ongoing investigation. A total of 43 firearms were seized and over 150 search warrants were executed. This highly successful operation crippled the daily operations of this street gang and served notice to others that law enforcement was after them. Detective Flores and Detective Oldendorf played a vital role in this operation and distinguished themselves by performing exceptional service and a duty of great responsibility and of critical importance to law enforcement. As such, the San Bernardino Police Department takes great pride in awarding Detective Nicholas Oldendorf and Detective Edward Flores the Police Distinguished Service Medal.
It's okay. It's okay.
Hello?
Hello?
Yes, this police department. How can I help you?
My husband just choked me out. He kicked me out, me and my kids out yesterday, and I went over there nicely, and I said I need to get clothes for work and get my kids stuff, and he just choked me out, and he pulled my hair, and he threw me out of the house. I need him arrested, gone out. He's violent, and he'll probably want the cops to shoot him, so he's not going to go nicely.
On the night of August 5th, 2015, a female fled her home in the 1700 block of North Banger Avenue along with her 2 small children after she had just been physically attacked and assaulted by her husband. She was fleeing to protect herself and her children from her husband, who had a violent criminal history and who also reportedly suffered from schizophrenia. The following day, she returned in the early morning hours to gather some of her belongings for herself and her children. She found her husband asleep in the residence and tried to gather her things quietly and quickly and flee again without awakening him. The suspect did awaken, and he proceeded to choke the victim and throw furniture at her in the presence of their 7-year-old son. They again fled the location, with the suspect throwing things at them as they ran from the home to safety. The victim at this time contacted the police, and officers Arturo Reyna and Officer Shane Thwaites arrived a short time later. After speaking with the victim away from the residence, they attempted contact at the home for the suspect, who was now wanted for domestic violence and child endangerment. After receiving no answer, they opened the front door and observed the suspect standing approximately 6 feet inside the door. He was holding a large fixed-blade hunting knife in his hand, and he had the knife's lanyard strapped around his wrist. The officers pleaded with the suspect to drop the knife, but he instead began walking towards them while waving the knife in a threatening manner and taunting the officers to shoot him. The officers backed into the front yard of the residence to try to create distance while continuing to try to calm the suspect. He instead elected to continue to advance on them. Officer Reyna had his taser pointed at the suspect as a less lethal option, and Officer Thwaites had his service weapon as a lethal force option. As the suspect charged at them, Officer Reyna deployed his taser. However, it did not cause the suspect to stop his advance. Officer Thwaites then fired one round, striking the suspect in the shoulder and ceasing his advancement on them.
1 Baker 13, I copy, shots fired. Charlie 4975 cooperating still.
1 Charlie 4, an update when you can.
Take him into custody now, go ahead and roll him medically.
Charlie 4, I copy.
The suspect was ultimately taken into custody and charged with multiple felony crimes. For an act of personal bravery intelligently performed in the line of duty, the San Bernardino Police Department is proud to honor Officer Shane Thwaites and Officer Arturo Reyna with the Police Star for Merit.
Hi, who is this that I'm talking to?
My name is Sally. I have a husband that's been he's been high on one. I don't know what he's on, but he's on probation, and he's not supposed to be arguing with me or pushing me or anything.
On August 29th, 2016, just after 11 o'clock in the morning, Officer Robert Hines and Officer Jay Rutherford were dispatched to a report of a domestic violence which was taking place inside of a residence in the 1100 block of West 16th Street. This was a board and care facility, with the husband and wife living at the location along with other residents. The male reportedly was threatening and physically assaulting the female. Officer Hines was the first to arrive on scene. As he approached and knocked on the front door, he did not receive an answer, but instead heard a female inside screaming for help. He entered through the unlocked front door and made his way toward the screams. As he went toward the back of the home and entered the den area, he could see and smell a strong chemical odor. The male suspect had activated 2 insecticide foggers in the room just prior to his entry. The chemical spraying from the cans was making it difficult to see and breathe. 2 females were seated on the couch in the room, and the male suspect was standing in front of them approximately 5 feet away. His body was bladed, and his right hand, which was down at his side, was concealed from Officer Hines's view. The suspect's wife told Officer Hines that her husband had a knife. Officer Hines drew his duty weapon and ordered the suspect to drop the knife and move away from the females. The suspect ignored his commands. Officer Hines broadcast over his radio what was taking place, and Officer Jay Rutherford, who was just arriving on scene, rushed in to help. Officer Rutherford also became immediately aware of the strong chemical odor in the room. Officer Hines advised he was transitioning to a less lethal option, as Officer Rutherford provided lethal cover with his sidearm. The two officers continued to order the suspect to drop the knife and move away from the females, and he continued to ignore them while staring at his wife blankly. With the suspect fixated on his wife, the officers coerced the second female to move toward them and away from the suspect. As she did so, they placed themselves between her and the suspect and instructed her to go outside to safety. As they tried to coerce the suspect's wife to also move toward them, the suspect lunged at her. This was the first time he revealed a large kitchen knife with an 8-inch fixed blade. The suspect stabbed his wife in her left side, and Officer Hines deployed his taser, and almost simultaneously, Officer Rutherford fired 2 rounds at the suspect. The suspect fell to the floor, unable to continue the attack.
Adam 14, that A for 1 with a stab wound, as well as the suspect with a gunshot wound.
I copy, 1 with a stab wound and a gunshot wound. We have medical aid started.
The officers immediately took the female from the insecticide-filled room and rendered medical aid to her. She was transported to the hospital and would ultimately recover from her injury. For having distinguished themselves by saving a life and having placed themselves into danger, the San Bernardino Police Department proudly presents Officer J. Rutherford and Officer Robert Hines with the Life-Saving Medal. In addition, for having demonstrated an act of personal bravery intelligently performed in the line of duty, the San Bernardino Police Department also awards Officer Rutherford and Officer Hines with the Star for Merit.
Baker 17, shots fired. Officer of the code 4 is still not complying.
Copy, and you're still California Mesa?
Paper.
Adam 21, Adam 24?
On September 3rd, 2016, just after 6:30 in the evening, dispatch received a report of a convertible vehicle driving recklessly in the area of California and Mesa. Officer Andrew Sabini responded on the call. Officer Sabini arrived on scene just in time to see the convertible turning westbound on Mesa from California. As he turned the corner, following the vehicle, he saw the car was stopped. As he exited his patrol car and approached on foot, he saw that there were 3 male occupants, with one of them seated parade style on the back of the car with an open bottle of alcohol in his hand. The subject ran from the vehicle, and Officer Sabini pursued on foot. The suspect fell while running, and Officer Sabini attempted to take him into custody. The suspect violently resisted and was able to free himself from Officer Sabini's grasp and rise to his feet. In spite of multiple commands to stop resisting, the suspect remained combative, and Officer Sabini deployed his taser, causing the suspect to fall to the ground. As Officer Sabini attempted to handcuff him, the suspect once again violently resisted, and Officer Sabini attempted to perform an LVNR to subdue him and take him into custody. While the struggle continued, Officer Sabini saw the suspect reaching into his front right pants pocket and pulling out a revolver. Fearing for his life, Officer Sabini pushed away from the suspect and pulled his duty weapon. As the suspect began to raise his gun, Officer Sabini fired, striking him and stopping the attack. The suspect was discovered to have been a documented 5-time gang member with multiple prior felony arrests for shootings and firearms-related offenses. At the time of his arrest, he had an active warrant for being a felon in possession of a firearm. The gun he had in his possession on that day had been reported as stolen out of Las Vegas, and it was a .22 caliber revolver fully loaded with 8 rounds. For having distinguished himself by bravery and heroism while engaged in personal combat with an armed adversary at imminent personal hazard to life, the San Bernardino Police Department is honored to present Officer Andrew Sabini with the Police Cross. On the night of April 28, 2016, gang officers Brian Olvera and Imran Ahmed were extra patrolling the 2600 block of West 5th Street. This was the 5-times gang territory and well-known hangout for its members. Patrolling nearby in a separate vehicle were fellow gang officers Martin Heisen and Junior Sines. As officers Olvera and Ahmed pulled onto 5th Street, they saw multiple gang members congregated in the shadows. Before they could even exit their unit, at least 2 of the gang members opened fire on them. The officers fired back, causing the thugs to flee. Officers Sines and Heisen rushed to the sounds of the gunfire. As Officer Sines took off through a vacant lot in foot pursuit of one of the suspects, that suspect turned to fire. Officer Sines was quicker to the draw and a better shot. The suspect was hit and taken into custody.
X-ray 3, shots fired. 2600 block, West 6th Street. 600 block of 6th Street, I copy shots fired. Unit 10-3 on channel 2, channel 2 10-3 for X-ray 4. Marty, jumping over, up and over. Get the terrace. X-ray 4 confirming 600 West 6. West 6th Street. Get somebody on the terrace now. Copy, get someone on terrace. Multiple shots fired, still coming from the terrace, Marty.
All 4 of our officers were fortunately unharmed in the encounter. For having performed an act of bravery, intelligently performed in the line of duty, the San Bernardino Police Department proudly presents Officer Martin Heisen with the Police Star for Merit. For having performed an act of bravery while engaged in personal combat with an armed adversary, the San Bernardino Police Department is honored to present Officer Brian Olvera, Officer Imran Ahmed, and Officer Junior Sines with the Police Cross. It was just after 6 o'clock in the evening on May 2nd, 2015, when dispatch received a report of 3 male subjects standing in front of a liquor store at 444 North Meridian. One of the 3 subjects reportedly had a gun in his hand, and the 3 subjects were looking towards the nearby liquor store. This particular location has a long history of gang and narcotics-related activity. Officers were dispatched to the location, and the first officer on scene observed the 3 matching the description given in a nearby alleyway. When the officer stopped and began to exit his car, all 3 suspects fled on foot. Sergeant Brian Harris arrived at the location approximately 30 seconds later, and he observed 2 of the subjects running eastbound on Foothill from Meridian. The 2 subjects began separating from one another, and Sergeant Harris keyed in on the one whose clothing description matched that of the one who reportedly had been seen with the gun. Sergeant Harris drove past the subject in an attempt to block his flight. While coming to a stop in front of the suspect, Sergeant Harris unholstered his duty weapon and ordered the suspect to stop and get on the ground. The suspect instead refused to comply and turned in the opposite direction in an effort to continue to evade Sergeant Harris. As he turned, Sergeant Harris could see that the suspect was, in fact, holding a semi-automatic handgun in his right hand. As the suspect reversed his direction, he quickly turned back to face Sergeant Harris while raising the gun at him. He was less than 12 feet away, and Sergeant Harris still had not even had the opportunity to exit his patrol unit. In defense of his own life, Sergeant Harris fired 3 rounds, with all 3 rounds striking the suspect and stopping the threat.
Baker 23, I copy your 97. Did you want a 10?
Baker 23, I got 3 running.
Copy, it's 10-3 on channel 144, Baker 23.
Baker 23, he's reaching into his waistband.
I copy.
For having distinguished himself by bravery and heroism while engaged in personal combat with an armed adversary at imminent personal hazard to life, above and beyond the normal demands of duty, the San Bernardino Police Department is proud to present then Sergeant Brian Harris, but now Lieutenant Brian Harris, with the Police Cross. During the evening hours of July 27th, 2016, Officer Junior Sines was heading back to his unit in the 3200 block of North Crescent Street after just having cleared a family disturbance call. While walking to his car, a passing motorist stopped to speak with him. The motorist informed Officer Sines of a subject who was stopped up the street and seemed to be intently watching the officer's actions. The motorist told Officer Sines that when he drove by the subject, it looked as if he had the 1,000-yard stare. Officer Sines decided to investigate further and walked in the direction of the blacked out vehicle which was parked north of his location. As Officer Sines approached on foot, the subject hurriedly exited his car and hid behind a bush. As Officer Sines approached on foot and began giving commands for him to come out, the suspect shined a bright light in his face from a portable spotlight he was carrying. The suspect then pulled a large hunting knife from his waistband and began charging towards Officer Sines. Officer Sines attempted to back up to maintain distance while giving commands for him to stop and drop the knife, but the suspect continued closing the gap while raising the knife in an aggressive manner. He got to within 6 feet when Officer Sines was forced to have to take action to defend his own life. He fired 2 rounds, striking the suspect and stopping the attack. The suspect's family later reported that the suspect had been heavily utilizing methamphetamine and had taken to listening music where the police were the enemy and should be attacked. At the time of his death, he was found to have had methamphetamine in his possession and in his bloodstream. For having distinguished himself by bravery and heroism while engaged in personal combat with an armed adversary at imminent personal hazard to life, the San Bernardino Police Department is proud to present Officer Junior Sines with the Police Cross.